I don't speak with any notes. I spoke in the D-Day Museum on June 6th.
We've been down there twice this summer.
You know the Louisiana Pavilion where you come in?
Mm-hmm.
They told me usually the people that are standing around listen to the speaker for about 2 minutes and they take off. These people stayed there. So I had about 500 people in there.
Okay, the tape's recording.
All right, we're getting back to when we crossed the road.
Mm-hmm.
Why we crossed the road, I'll never know. But I followed, and I had to drag behind because of my wounded foot. In fact, the doctors can't figure out how I was able to move because my metatarsals were shot out. My big toe was cut in half. My second toe was hanging loose. So they didn't know how I got it, but I staggered after these fellas, and it was a complete wipeout. And I landed on top of them. And they moaned for a while. One fellow was "Help me, Jesus," and they finally, it was silent. And there I was laying with 6 dead 29th Division men. And I was waiting for the Germans to come down the road and wipe me out. And I had seen all these war movies. So I grabbed this submachine gun, which I never fired in my life, from this Ranger. And I had my rifle, and I was going to go out in a blaze of glory, like you see in the movies. And nobody came. Gave myself another shot of morphine because I was hurting. And because that was my 3rd wound. And I was losing a lot of blood. And was starting to turn a little blue. But anyway, I gave myself a little shot of morphine, and I don't remember anything except at 12:30, 3 German planes went over. So what would you think? You're laying with all dead soldiers. You're all alone out there. There's Germans up in front of you. There's German planes going over. They have a different sound than an American plane. It's sort of an off-on sound, like It's not like a steady drone. And I saw their insignias go over. In fact, they were that low that I covered my watch. I figured the luminous dial, which was kind of ridiculous, but I did it. But I don't remember anything except a little dream I was having. I thought I was having a nightmare, probably from the morphine. But this fellow, Stuart Bryant, told me he interviewed German soldiers, and there was a German patrol went down that road, and they stopped to search the bodies in this ditch. And he's got a picture of this ditch that I was in. And he put it in the 29th Division newspaper. These Germans were searching us for cigarettes. They didn't find any on me. But evidently, they knew I was alive, because one of them must have said to me, "Don't worry, Yankee boy, you're going to be all right." And they went on. So my number wasn't up again. Could have put a bayonet in me or something. 3 o'clock in the morning, and there was a huge moon on D-Day. One of the biggest moons I've ever seen. I saw a silhouette of an Army ambulance coming down that road from the west. Now, I didn't think anybody was up in front of me in the west, but I found out later that General Coda, leading a group of soldiers, went by this ditch, and he made a note that there were 7 dead GIs in the ditch. And they had a firefight up in front. There were only 2 ambulances on D-Day, according to our physician, Dr. Joseph Shelley of St. Augustine, Florida. And one went down in the channel. That was the only ambulance. And it was coming down that road. I couldn't speak. I was getting very weak. My fingers were getting needles, pins feeling. I fired at the ambulance with this submachine gun that I never fired in my life, and I fired over the top of it. And the guys got out with their hands up, and they saw it was one of theirs, and they asked me a silly question: "Can you sit up in the ambulance?" Now, being a medical student and I can't picture. They lifted me up, one under each arm, and the blood just rolled off. And I can't imagine why they asked me that, but I nodded my head. They put me in the back of the ambulance on the cold floor, and I fell back from weakness, and I heard one of the fellows say in a New York accent, and I've never been able to locate these guys, this guy just passed out. I didn't pass out. I knew what was going on. And I figured out why they had me sit up. I found out from Stuart Bryant there was a firefight up in front, and some 29ers got wounded. And the sides of the ambulance had the stretchers. So that's why he had me set up. Took me down to St. Laurent-sur-Mer beach, and they stretched us out on the beach, in our stretchers, on the beach. There were 12 of us lined up. Gave me more morphine. They tagged me with a tag around my neck. And about 10 o'clock the next morning, the snipers opened up on us from where the American cemetery is nowadays, in the bluff. And they started on that side. They had telescopic sights because they put a bullet right through the Red Cross on the fellow's arm that was giving me water and first aid and so forth. So they started over on that side, and they started knocking off the wounded. When they got to me, they shot me in the right knee. Blood was spurting all over the place. And the next one was going through here. But I found out the name of the ship that came offshore. It was the destroyer McCook, because I was speaking in Alachua, Florida. And a man that was the gunnery officer on that ship owned a restaurant called the Rebel House Restaurant, and he had my picture on the wall. He had my book. And he said, we were the guys that blew these snipers away. And the shells came right over my head, you know, and blew a big dust dome came up, and the snipers were gone. About 3 o'clock that afternoon, 4 Navy guys picked up my stretcher. Nobody all that time knew about my foot injury because they had blankets over me to prevent shock. So every time they bumped me, that foot was killing me. So they took me out to an assault boat, and the assault boat took me out to LST 291. You can see how conscious I was. I got the number of the ship. They hoisted me up the side with ropes, laid me out on the deck, and there I saw a huge U.S. flag. So I knew we didn't lose the battle. They took me in a little while into a little emergency operating room. They cut off all my clothes, threw them in the garbage. They started giving me blood and glucose. They dripped glucose in my mouth. They cleaned me up. They left the face open. They didn't do anything with my face, but they had to sew my knee up because they was pumping. My foot, nobody paid attention to that. I didn't get back to England until, they gave me penicillin every 3 hours. It was the newest thing. But penicillin does not kill the bugs that are gotten in a battlefield wound. So by the time I got to England on June 11th, I had gangrene in my left foot, and the bones were all shattered. So luckily, they put me in this little garage on the LST. British officer came by, and he pointed at me with a swagger stick. 4 British soldiers walked off with me at Portsmouth, through the water, into an old beat-up British ambulance. They didn't have kind of ambulances we had. They took me to the Royal Navy Hospital in Gosport, Haslett, England. And they operated on me that evening. And I thought I was going to lose my foot because they looked at it, it was green. It was moldy, you know, from gangrene. And a British commander named Commander Keating was doing the operating. They took out the gums and teeth that were laying there from June 6th. They left the face open, though. When I took water in my mouth, it came out of my nose because there was a hole, roof of the mouth was blown out. So they cleaned me up. They use chloroform in their surgery. We don't use that in the States. When I woke up from the chloroform, I reached down for my leg and I didn't feel anything, so I started crying. And the British nurses are great. They're called sisters. They came over and they spotted why I was crying, and they took the sheet off, and it was a big cast. And my foot was in a bird cage. If I had gone to an American hospital, no aspersions on American doctors, because I'm one, but they would have amputated. But the British are great anatomists. In fact, the anatomy book I used in medical school was Scottish. Anyway, he had each toe pulled up in a bird cage, and they salvaged my foot. I had probably 8 or 10 operations after that over the years, but I'm able to walk now. When I'm digressing though on you. They operated on my face in the 250th Station Hospital, U.S. hospital. And they sewed up the face. That was a primary suture job, but water was still coming out of my nose, or milk or whatever I was liquid drinking. I was really on a soft diet. I didn't have any chewing ability. Then they transferred me to the 154th Station General Hospital. Then ultimately in August 21st, they flew me to Scotland. I was there for about less than 24 hours. And they put me on an airplane to breakfast in Iceland, lunch in Newfoundland, dinner in Mitchell Field Hospital in Long Island, New York. I weighed 110 pounds then. And I had to jump out of the plane because they didn't have any steps. You know, I was on crutches. So my parents, I called my parents from Mitchell Field Hospital because I was a New Yorker. And my sisters came out, my mother and father walked right by me because the face was horribly scarred. Lines going down here, across here, looked like Boris Karloff. Lip was gone, so I looked terrible. And I was on crutches in a cast. I spent 3 days there, and my head was still kind of bald from the shaving job, so I didn't look like myself. You know, from 185 to 110. They flew me to Massachusetts, put me in Cushing General Hospital, and there they brought in plastic surgeons, and they got to work on me. By Thanksgiving time, 1944, I looked normal again. I had the greatest plastic surgeon in the world named Michael Lewin, who practiced in Fifth Avenue, New York. He came down to my hometown and talked to all the plastic surgeons. They told me he was like the Mickey Mantle of plastic surgery. So I was very fortunate. And the foot and the face, after more operations, I had more operations. Even 2-3 years ago, I had surgery inside the mouth. I had special surgery in the sinus. They had to scrape out all the metal and bones out of the sinus. So I've had a lot of surgery, but I didn't let it interfere with my schooling. I got discharged February 12th, 1945. February 14th, I was in class at New York University, taking my pre-med courses.
Pretty impressive. You were going to describe the German obstacles for us.
Oh, yes. The German obstacles, there were 4 of them. They started out with the Belgium gates. They were 7 feet wide and made out of iron and 10 feet high. And there were a lot of them. They were all in one row. And they were all mined and barbed wired. That was to stop the boats from coming in. Now at high tide, you can just about see the tops of them. The second row, which was about 50 yards, that was 300 yards from that seawall. The second obstacle was 50 yards closer to the seawall. It was poles. And they had poles made of cement or logs, and they were all facing north. And they had telemines strapped to the top of them. and they were to blow up the boats also. The next row were called the ramps. They were 2 logs at a 45-degree angle. There's a picture of them downstairs. That was so the boats would go up these ramps and throw the men out the rear, if their mines didn't blow the boat up first. The last one were the hedgehogs that I described before. 3 iron rails welded together and cemented into the ground and stood 5 foot high. And that was very evident in Saving Private Ryan because Tom Hanks leaned against one of them. And that's the most common obstacle, called the hedgehog. And they're all barbed wired and mined. So we had double problems. You had to get through the barbed wire, through the mines, and save your own rear end. Most of the battle on our beach was a battle for survival. General Omar Bradley decided no more reinforcements. We were supposed to get the 115th Regiment of the 29th to reinforce us. He said no reinforcements to that beach. He landed them further down to the east, which were safer beaches. This is why we fought wounded. Either you gave up that beach or you kept fighting. So we decided to keep fighting. So we saw all our buddies dead. And you get what's known as crying mad. When I saw this Robert Garbett laying there, I was crying. The only reason, years ago I couldn't talk to you like this. I would crack up. I started talking about D-Day after 1988. And I started writing everything down. And my purpose for speaking and my purpose for writing my book is so that these guys that'll never be mentioned by Stephen Ambrose will be remembered by somebody. So I got Cecil Breeden remembered, Nicholas Kafkalis, all these guys that'll never be mentioned. Bedford Hoback. Well, Bedford Hoback, being a Bedford boy, is mentioned in a book called Bedford Boys now, new book. But a lot of them will never be mentioned. And to me, they're the biggest heroes, the ones face down in the sand. And I visited my buddy in St. Augustine. He's the only 29th Division man buried there. That's Robert Garbett Jr. And the only reason I found his grave, he was married to a girl in Oxford. And I wrote to the mayor of Oxford, and they didn't know anything about him. Couldn't find his wife, who was pregnant at the time. I wrote to the mayor of Newport News, Virginia. And they got his name up on what they have downtown, like an Arc de Triomphe, and they got his name on there. But nobody knew where he was buried. So Joe Balkowski was in St. Augustine, Florida, and he found that name. And the reason he found it was the only 29th Division man. So he was interested because his book speaks about the 29th Division, beyond the beachhead. So I visit that grave, and being Jewish, I put a rock on the stone. This is a tradition when you visit a gravestone. I just did this in Normandy. I visited Harold Donaldson's grave. He'll never be mentioned in anybody's book because you have to be interviewed. So I got a nice index in my book, got all their names and their pictures. If I got Robert Ditmar, his mother adopted me. She sent me a engagement present when I was getting ready to get married, a wedding present, and she was too sick to visit her son's grave when they brought his body back for Arlington. So on my honeymoon, took my wife to Arlington, and we visited his grave, took a picture, which is in my book, and I sent it to his mother. So I got his mother's picture in the book, his picture from World War II, and his gravestone. So it's my good deed towards my buddies. And all the profits of my book go to the National D-Day Museum or the 29th Division or the National D-Day Memorial. Most of it goes to the museum in New Orleans. I don't keep any profit for myself. And the reason I went to medical school, I was going to give up on it due to all this surgery. I became a school teacher. In fact, I coached football at Palm Beach High. Burt Reynolds was in my backfield, and I sent him to Florida State. Nice kid, incidentally. Good kid. I saw him recently. Gave me a hug. But anyway, that's the reason I talk about D-Day and so forth. So these guys won't be forgotten.
You know, you lived through the beach. You fought your way up to the top of the bluff, and you guys are up there along that hedgerow. What were you thinking? I mean, that must have been pretty terrible.
You know, a lot of people ask me that question. When I speak to people on a cruise ship, for example, I usually volunteer my services, and they ask me these questions. What were you thinking? You're a soldier. You're doing your job. The main thing you're thinking of, where's the next guy that's going to be shooting at me? And you want to get him before he gets you. It's kill or be killed. There's not much time to think about anything else. You're a soldier. And utmost in our mind was to get to those Rangers, because they instructed us. They're going to be cut to pieces. They're going to be outnumbered. They were outnumbered. I just met with Len Lomel, one of the Rangers that went up that bluff. He was with Marty Morgan and I in Lawrence, Kansas. We were on the same panel together. And he's the guy that blew all those guns, single-handed. He only got a Distinguished Service Cross. That's another thing. The giving of medals, it was very artificial for D-Day. 50% of the Distinguished Service Crosses for D-Day were given to captain or above. Now, I looked around on that beach. I didn't see any captain or above. The two captains in Company A and Company B were killed in the water. The other officers were all killed. The only officer I saw General Coder, who was very brave and deserved the medal, and a major with him. I didn't see any other officer. We were all on our own, all privates. And the privates were fighting the war. Why they gave me 2 Bronze Stars, I'll never know. Probably they had guilt feelings. I couldn't think of it. Of course, my biggest medal is the Combat Infantry Badge, because you can't get that unless you're in combat. And on my license plate in my car, I got my Purple Heart, Florida license plate. So what we were thinking about was fighting, and you know, you think of a little survival for yourself if you can. I thought I was too far gone already. I didn't know anything about plastic surgery, so I figured with those wounds, I had it. But there's always that survival. See, I fired at the ambulance with probably one of my last things I could do. I hadn't handled a weapon until recently. I threw away those guns, never wanted to touch a weapon. I went to Bosnia recently. I fired the M16. I qualified as expert. I fired the 9mm pistol, which I never fired a pistol in the service. And I put 6 bullets right in the heart. So my shooting ability is still there.
9mm is a great pistol.
Yeah, well, I never fired a pistol in the service.
Well, I got to tell you, if you had, you'd have been impressed, because that 45 is nothing compared to that 9mm.
Right, well, it was great. They scored us electronically, so I know I qualified expert. So I think I impressed you with the reason I wanted to become a doctor. I felt I was saved for some reason. You know, there's no way somebody could live through 5 wounds like that and still be able to talk about it. And so I figured, you know, a bullet anyway a little to the right or the left, and that's it. I would have been finished. So I figured God saved me for some reason. I was praying on the beach. You might want, I didn't tell you that. The only prayer I knew a Hebrew prayer, which is a belief in one God. And I repeated that prayer, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And I said it in Hebrew. And whether that did me any good or not, I don't know. But I am religious. I do go to my synagogue every Saturday. I got a big holiday coming up. They wanted to do a documentary on me from London. They wanted me to fly the end of this week to France to do one on the beach. It's the Windfall Production Company of London. You know the lady, Anna Lloyd? She's the producer. Anyway, I refused, so they're going to call me October 8th because I got a big holiday coming up on the 6th.
Sure.
So what else can I tell you?
You know,
In my practice, I charge 30% lower than any of my doctors in my community. If they didn't have money, they didn't have to pay me. I was repaying. I mean, why else was I safe? Here I'm following this guy down the wall, and a sniper picks him off. He had a telescopic sight. Why not me? And I had bad dreams for a long time. Even today, when I follow a bus and I inhale some of that diesel, I flash back to the assault boat, because you smell diesel in the assault boat. That's what made some of the guys nauseated and seasick, the smell of diesel.
what do you think turned the battle around for the Americans on Omaha? I mean, the first 15 minutes was horrendous.
Right.
What changed that?
What turned it around?
Right.
I think the courage of the guys fighting wounded. You know, those Germans that were guarding Vierville, they weren't going to stay in those things. Sooner or later, they were going to come down that hill. So, I think 29th Division did a good job. General Coder especially. He didn't say follow, go do this. He led the guys. He was in front of them. I understand he passed me that night on the road. Had a pistol in one hand, and he was tough. Now, I didn't see Colonel Canham on the beach, but he got wounded in the wrist, and he kept fighting, wounded. Cecil Breeden dressed his wrist, never got any medals, never got a Purple Heart. I wrote an affidavit. I wrote a letter to President Truman when I got back, asking him to, recommending a congressional medal for Cecil Breeden. And he referred it to the Army. They buried it. A lot of the 29ers wrote to his congressman in Colorado to try to get him a Distinguished Service Cross. The Army wouldn't give him anything. They wouldn't give me a cluster for my Purple Heart. They said it probably happened from one wound. Well, I said, I'm a physician, I have x-rays. I'll go before your committee, 3 civilians in Washington, and I'll show x-ray proof of different wounds. Because, my foot, you can see the hole, you can see the type of wound to the face. It's all blown apart, by shrapnel. This wound, you can see a little hole in there. So they're all different wounds. And I never got it. So I gave up. And one of our officers, we didn't have many officers left, but Ray Nance, who was the executive officer of Company A, still alive, in Bedford, Virginia, he was dressed, his 2 wounds were dressed by Cecil Breeden. The captain was killed. He was in command of Company A. All he had to do was write a recommendation for Cecil Breeden. You can see how brave the guy was. He was exposing himself to enemy fire, and I put my hand on his shirt to pull him down, and he slapped my hand away. He said, "You're hurt now. When I get hurt, you can take care of me." So I call him the biggest, in my book, I call him the biggest hero of D-Day. And the other guys will attest to it. Anybody that was in Company A that's still alive will know that. Ray Nance knows it.
There's not a heck of a lot of you guys left.
No. No, and I'm the only one with the memory that can talk about Dog Green Sector. So like I told Marty Morgan when he took the 3-hour interview in my apartment, after I go, that's it. The story dies, unless you keep it alive.
Well, we're going to keep it alive, I guarantee it. What else stands out in your mind? What did we miss?
I think we covered everything. We covered the training. We covered Dog Green Sector. And I told you the noise was horrendous. And the tide kept coming in and going out. And the bodies were being washed back and forth. And it was a horrible sight as far as the dead bodies. The people that came in after us finally, like the 175th came in on our beach on June 7th. And the American 2nd Division came in on our beach. And these guys saw these dead bodies. They were still stacked up. They stayed there for quite a while. One of the fellas that was in this Company A boat that drowned, where he was saved, his name was Roy Stevens of Bedford. And he had an identical twin brother that landed with one of those 3 boats that hit the beach. And he came back on the 9th from England. He would have been dead also had he landed. And he found his brother's body. Identical twin. Ray Stevens. There's a few of the boys from Bedford still around, but they don't have any memory for anything. I go to their Company A meetings, and there's not many of them around. There's a fellow named John Barnes that wrote a book called Fragments of My Life with Company A. He was in that boat where he was rescued, so he never landed on D-Day. So in his book, he tells people to read my book if they want to know anything about D-Day. And he put in his book that out of his 8 or 9 months of combat, he said Hal Baumgarten saw more action in his 32 hours. So he put that in writing, which was pretty nice.
So now it's 60 years down the road, and you're looking back on it now. All those guys, all that
It's horrible. War is terrible. War is horrible.
Was it worth it?
It was worth it from one standpoint. If you put yourself in the position of these people in these camps, these Holocaust camps, the people in the slave camps, they were using slave labor. The French people, they say, thank you, they kiss us on our hands. The older people, the young people, I say, why do you thank us so much? If it wasn't for you, we'd be speaking German. They were actually enslaved for 4 years. You know, we don't know what it is to live like that. You know, a few of the women fraternized with the Germans, but most of the people hated them. What they did in St. Lo, right when our outfit was approaching to take St. Lo, they lined up these people against the wall and just killed them, wholesale. So we don't know what it is to be enslaved. So I think we did our good deed to the world. We may never be completely thanked for it. France just turned against us as a government. The people, though, appreciate us. I got kissed on both cheeks over there, and they gave us cookies. I went to pay for a keychain in the museum there, and this fellow Lefebvre was there 3 days before, told him I was coming. I said, comment ça coûte? You know, I wanted to pay for the, how much do I owe you? They said nothing. They wouldn't take any money from me. But the French people do like for you to talk French. Because if you talk English, sometimes they get aggravated. But not the Normans. My wife has a pen pal from the 50th anniversary of D-Day, and they've been corresponding since. She's a retired school teacher, and I got to take her out in Paris. One time we went there, and a very nice lady. She purposely learned English so she could write to my wife. And we have friends in Paris that write to me maybe 10 times a year, and they always end their letter with, the unforgettable will never be forgotten. And in my book, I put, when I went to the American cemetery for the first time, I saw French children decorating the graves with flowers in our cemetery. And I told Stephen Ambrose it was all worthwhile when I saw that. So he put that in his book. He liked that statement.
War's pretty bad.
War is hell.
Yeah, it really is.
And
anybody that's ever been there.
I had the chance to go to Bosnia, Thanksgiving 2001, and I met these young soldiers. They were dying to talk to us. I had to autograph books for them, so forth. But they are really gems. They're really good soldiers. Of course, they have bulletproof vests now. They have night vision goggles. They have radio communication, where my buddy Garbett had a walkie-talkie. It was worthless if you had a hill in front of you. But these things are GPS. They can communicate. They have weapons that are laser controlled. They have handheld mortars. They have guns that are light. That M16 is light. They told me to fire it, on one knee, and it's like a toy rifle compared to my M1. I lifted an M1 downstairs today. It's heavy, and I used to fire it with one hand.
How hard was it for you to go back to a beach after the war?
Very hard. The first time back was '88. We dedicated the 29th Division monument in Vierville. And before we went out there, I fortified myself with a bottle of wine. And I went out there, and it still cracked me up because I was seeing things that the average person didn't see. I could picture where each guy was laying. Lucille Bodges, who's the sister of Bedford Holback and Raymond Holback. They never found Raymond's body. He was washed out to sea. She asked me where Bedford was laying when he got killed. Took her to the spot, and she said, you really helped me. I feel relief by it, by knowing it. And I told her how he died. It was quick. I told Clarence Robeson's family how he died with his rosary beads. I asked permission of some of my guys, should I tell them? It was at a Company B meeting in Madison Heights, Virginia. And they said, by all means, tell them. And they felt good about it, that he was praying when he died. So, I would have thought maybe it would have been too horrible for them. Now, recently I got in touch with Hal Weber's brother and his niece and his nephew. And they came to visit me in Jacksonville Beach. The fellow's mother visited me in Cushing General Hospital. I did not tell him that his face was shot off, but I told his brother recently how he died. And they gives him a feeling of closure. He's buried in Springfield, Massachusetts. So a lot of these 9,360 crosses and stars in the American cemetery, it would be a lot more if the bodies weren't taken home. So a lot of them were brought home. But war is horrible, and it's a shame that we have to fight wars. Now, a lot of the guys that went over with me were college students, and they lost their lives. A lot of them had futures, ahead of them. Some of them had families. If you read this book, Bedford Boys, this fellow, Alexander Kershaw, tells the story of the families in Bedford. And some of the stuff that I didn't know, how the families, one lady was having her baby while he was overseas. Never got to see the kid. Never saw his child. And he dreamt about coming home and seeing, you know, she sent him pictures, but. So a lot of families were wiped out. One man committed suicide in Bedford because he was so depressed, one of the fathers. And the Holback parents never were the same. You know, they were farmers, they lived in this little town, never the same. All the telegrams went out on one day, 21 telegrams in July, I think July 10th, from the drugstore in the town, Green's drugstore. They delivered all the telegrams same day, 21. 18 in the first 5 minutes on Dog Green Sector. Of course, I saw a lot of their bodies on the beach. And they were the guys I trained with. One of the fellas was he was like my instructor. He was 29th Ranger. He was in the next bed to me. His name was Jack Powers. And I looked up to him as being a super soldier, very handsome guy. And he taught me all the tricks of being a good soldier. He lasted 2 minutes on the beach. His picture is in this book, Bedford Boys.
And there's no accounting for why somebody does.
No, if you, that's what I'm saying. I may have been saved for some reason. And I got my family, and my kids are thankful that I lived. So I have two fine girls and a son. One daughter's a lawyer in New Orleans. She's going to France for the 60th. And my other daughter was a professor at Houston University, and now she's a travel agent. She gave up all that stuff. She was the youngest professor on the faculty of Houston University. She looks like Michelle Pfeiffer, so they made her wear glasses and put her hair up in a bun because she looked too good. And my son is in the process of getting married. He's 38 years old, so I'm going to have a wedding this year.
That's great.
And I got 6 grandchildren.
Congratulations.
2 of them are at college. So it must have been a reason for me to exist. Maybe just to tell the story. Maybe I was given the power and the ability to talk. Like I get up on these ships, there are maybe 1,000 people with a microphone on the stage, and I can talk. No script. So don't let the story die.
We won't. We promise you. And when we finish the documentary, I'll make sure you get a copy.
Great. You got my address.
Yep, I do.
Swell.